Genesis 21 is where we're going to start this morning. Genesis 21, and we've got some ground to cover today, so I'm going to have to summarize a little bit. It's been a couple weeks, so I'm going to have to try to catch you up a little bit on where we have been and get us all back up to speed. We're in the book of Genesis right now in a series called Back to the Beginning, where we are going back to the first 5 books of the Bible, to the Pentateuch, and we are working our way through those first 5 books, not verse by verse like we have done and like we would typically do, and not even necessarily story by story, but kind of like, I would call it like pillar by pillar in this book, kind of like big chunks, big important moments in these in the narrative. Not that it's not all important, but things that kind of our faith hinges on and kind of hangs on in these first few books, and I'll be honest. I kind of have some freedom on what I can preach and not preach, and what I can do and what I cannot do, and I really wrestled with what to do this week. And the purpose in all of this is to kind of bring us back to our roots and remember what God's plan was for us from the very beginning. These books, like Luke and like Revelation, are all set in context. The books that we've studied most recently, they're all set in a context that begins right here in these first 5 books of the Bible. And last week we looked at Abraham's call to follow God, Abram as he's known at the time, to follow God's call, and how the writer of Hebrews commends Abraham for his faith and says that he left a place that was his home to become a sojourner, and that in sojourning and in leaving that place and going wherever it is that God calls him, he demonstrated his faith that he had in God. And if that were all that Abraham were to do, he would have been fine. If that was all he was called to do, and that was the end of his story, that he then went and became a sojourner and became this guy who kind of moved around and wandered around at God's will and God's command, and that was all of his story, it would have been fine. But his story doesn't stop there. It gets way more complex, way more kind of confusing, which is a good reminder to all of us here as we get started, that the life of faith, it may begin for us with one moment, one decision, one decision of us to say, okay, I will follow Christ. Like, no, doesn't matter if anybody's going with me, I'm going to follow Jesus. But the life of faith is not simply one decision. It is one decision that is then followed by decision after decision after decision, one that builds on the other and leads to then a life of faith. And all of that sounds nice until you actually have to live that life. And then when you have to live that life, you realize this is hard, and this is complicated, and this isn't always easy to know. Right, left, stay, go. What do I do? What is the right thing here? And I'll be honest, I have kind of the choice of what I can preach and what I cannot preach. I could have skipped this story if I wanted to this morning, and you guys probably wouldn't have said much about it, but I feel like it's a very important story, and I felt like God couldn't let me really get away from it, but I didn't want to preach it. It's not my favorite story in the Bible. It's not my favorite one to preach, and I'll explain why shortly. But more than that, there are some Sundays where I need to be out there more than I need to be up here, if that makes sense. Where I need to be out there and someone else needs to be standing up here preaching, and I need to be listening, and this is one of those Sundays. Now, don't misunderstand me. I need to hear and apply every sermon that I preach before I preach it to you, and I do my very best to make sure that happens. I preach to myself before I stand up here. But this one is still a little bit tender for me, and I feel like I should be out there listening, not standing up here teaching. And so I preach this one as someone who is actively trying to figure out how to apply this in my own life. And Abraham's experience here feels pretty personal to me in more ways than I can probably share this morning. So just know I'll be in two places at once for the rest of this sermon. I will be standing here, and I will be probably, sitting over there next to my wife listening as well and trying to figure out how do I apply this. And so Genesis 12 and 15 2 weeks ago is what we looked at. And you actually got a double dose of this. So you got this from me, and then while I was on sabbatical, you also got it from Brian. And my thought process was that I would try to make a little different nuance, but the more I listened to Brian's sermon, the more I was like, I think we said a lot of the same things. But it's fine because it's such an important story. I told you some people would put Genesis 12 as the most important chapter in all of Scripture. And so it's good that we could kind of go through this. And we saw these incredible scenes a couple of weeks ago. If you weren't here, we saw this scene where God comes to Abraham, calls him to go, and then he ends up making a covenant with Abraham where he splits animals in two, and God, represented by a smoking pot and a fire, goes between those animals, and that is the way that they signified ratifying a covenant. And so God tells Abraham, go, and Abraham says, well, all right, then I guess I'll go. And he does all of this. It was an incredible scene, great lesson of faith and what it means to trust God and to not try to build your own kingdom, but instead trust God and live for His. Now, you fast forward another year, and Abram at the time, I'm still going to go back and forth using Abraham, you know who I'm talking about. Abram is getting impatient, and understandably so. He's trying to figure out, God, when are you going to do this thing that you promised you were going to do? Neither he or his wife are getting any younger. They were already old. He and Sarah look around and they think, well, maybe it's on us to make this happen. Maybe what God said is, look, I promise you I'll do this, but really what it meant was like, you go do what you need to do to make this happen, and I'll just bless whatever it is that you do. And so Sarah kind of says, here's a plan. I got an idea. Abram, why don't you just have a kid with one of my servants, and she will bear you a son? Obviously, I can't. I'm too old. So here's Hagar. Why don't you just go have a kid with her? Which I cannot imagine how that conversation would have actually gone. It had to be a very awkward one for Abraham. But they follow through on this plan. Ishmael is born, and Sarah and her servant Hagar immediately have like second thoughts. Like, what have we done? We messed this up. This was a problem. We probably shouldn't have done this. But at this point, it's done. What's done is done. And so their son Ishmael is born, and then 13 years pass after that. Like, 13 years pass after that. That is a long time. They hear nothing from God. This was good. This was bad. You're punished. You're blessed. Nothing. They hear nothing. And then God finally returns to tell Abraham, all right, it's time for me to fulfill that promise that I made to you so long ago, that your descendants would be like the stars in the sky, like the sand on the seashore. That is what's going to happen to Abraham. Here I am. I'm going to fulfill this. It's time for me to make that happen. To which Abraham is kind of like, oh, I kind of thought you were going to do that through Ishmael. It's this plan me and Sarah came up with. I kind of thought you were going to do that through him. To which God replies, well, tell you what, I'm not going to forget about him, but that was your plan. That was not mine. That was something you tried to make happen. I have a plan, and I'm going to do something, which there's a whole sermon in there that I don't even get to preach right there. But there is one. He says, God says, I've got a plan. I'm going to do something that is completely impossible. I am going to give you a son through Sarah, who is 90 at this point. Understandably, Abraham laughs at this plan and says, that's ridiculous. My plan was bad. God, your plan is worse. This is how Isaac gets his name, because like Abraham laughed at him. And this is all Genesis 16 and 17. That's my best summary of it. There's a lot more there, a lot more nuance. You should read it. But that sets up the rest of our morning and the next part that comes. I normally don't do that much backstory, but it's important that I do that because you have to understand all of these stories are meant to be taken together. We read them isolated and draw our lessons out of them in an isolated way, which I kind of get. Like I said, there's a whole sermon to preach there. I'm not even going to preach. But these stories are meant to be read together, and it's because they sit in direct contrast to each other. And these two stories, Ishmael and Isaac, set up the story that will be our focus for the morning. And I'll explain to you why this is not my favorite story in the Bible. Honestly, if I just read it, I think you probably will be like, oh, I kind of get why this is not your favorite. But before we get there, let's just see what happens. God says, I'm going to give you a son. You're going to name him Isaac, and you're going to be blessed. So let's read Genesis 21, 1 through 7, when God comes through on that promise. The Lord visited Sarah as he had said, and the Lord did to Sarah as he had promised. And Sarah conceived and bore Abraham a son in his old age at the time of which God had spoken to him. Abraham called the name of his son who was born to him, whom Sarah bore him, Isaac. And Abraham circumcised his son Isaac when he was 8 years old, as God had commanded him. And Abraham was 100 years old when his son Isaac was born to him. And Sarah said, God has made laughter for me. Everyone who hears will laugh over me. That's not like laughing at me. That is a laughter of joy, of happiness that is there. And she said, Who would have said to Abraham that Sarah could nurse children? Yet I have borne him a son in his old age. So Genesis 21 opens up, and it is such a feel-good moment here. It is such a good moment, in a moment of chaos and confusion and regret that kind of fills this narrative. This is a feel-good moment. It's got like 90s sitcom written all over it to me. Like everyone is laughing. They're laughing about laughter being born. That is really what is happening. And they're like, isn't this crazy? This is our son, the son of promise. He's here. Who would believe it? Not me. Ha, ha, ha. Like, that's kind of what is happening here. Like, everybody's kind of cheesing it up. Everybody is smiling. They're making jokes about it. Like, this should be closed scene in the series here. We're good. But that's not what happens. The story keeps going. Now we got more drama tied to Ishmael. If you keep going in chapter 21, and whether he'll live or whether he'll die, but God is faithful in his promise to take care of him and allow him to live. And then we get to Genesis 22. And if you want one story that has been used by critics as much as any in all of the Bible to say, see, look at this. This is ridiculous. Who wants to worship a God like that? What are we doing trying to take an ancient religion like this that has child sacrifice at the heart of it? Why are we doing this? This is an evidence enough that we should not take Christianity or Judaism seriously at all. To which I would like to say to them, like, I completely get that response. I totally understand where that is coming from. I hated this story for the longest time until I preached this probably 10 years ago at this point. I hated it. It doesn't feel right whenever you read it. It makes me feel kind of icky whenever I read it. Like, I don't like what is going on here. I don't like the way I feel. I don't like any of this. And namely, the reason why it's like that is whenever you read through it, like, I read through it in the lens that I was taught this story for so long, a lens that I completely disagree with now. And really it revolves around the central theme of the story. So let's read the opening verses. I'll explain to you what I'm talking about, and then we'll do a little bit of work here to understand where we're going. So Genesis 22, 1 and 2. After these things, God tested Abraham and said to him, Abraham. And he said, Here I am. And he said, Take your son, your only son Isaac, whom you love, and go to the land of Moriah, and offer him there as a burnt offering on one of the mountains to which I shall tell you. Like, I almost feel like I need to read those verses again. The whole premise is wild. Like, what are we reading about? Like, this is what we read about other gods asking their religions to do. What is our God asking Abraham to do here? Now, before we get too carried away, let's remember that as wild as this suggestion is that is here to us, it may not have been quite as wild to Abraham in the sense that child sacrifice would not have been abnormal for a religion of his time in the place where he was at. As horrible as that is to say, it is a matter of fact. It may not have been the norm, but it certainly wouldn't have been unheard of where he was. a God supposedly demanding this for appeasement wouldn't have been completely radical as it is to us today. Now, it's still radical, just not quite out of left field the same way that it is for us. And let's remember as well, we have to constantly remind ourselves of this. Abraham did not know God the way we know God. Abraham did not know his character the way we know his character. We've seen just a few interactions between Abraham and God. He doesn't have a Bible he can open up and he can be like, oh, this is not how I think you work. For him, God says something and Abraham says, oh, well, I guess that's how you work. Like that is the simple, like this is what I'm supposed to do. So I guess I need to do this. So he doesn't know God the same way. He's just doing what he's supposed to do. He's still learning the character and the nature of God. Now, this is where things have gone off the rails in the past. And if you've been around Providence, you've heard me talk about this. So I apologize if this is repetition a little bit, but as my old professor would say, repetition's the mother of all learning. So this is where things have gone off the rails in the past for me. And I've heard this teaching, and this is where I struggled and felt so much guilt and so much confusion. And it's in this word test, that God tested Abraham. And the idea here is that God was going to give such an incredible demand and test to Abraham to test his loyalty and his love. Who did Abraham love more? Isaac or God? And then we just want to know, did Abraham pass the test or not? If he passes the test, he's blessed. If he doesn't, well, then, things are going to go bad and he's going to be punished. But the basis of the test is, who did Abraham love more? Who was sitting on top the hierarchy of that pyramid that says this person gets the most love? God or Isaac? Which one is it? Abraham should love Isaac, but not too much, lest God be angry. So what are we to do? And then the application point for that, for me and you, would be, make sure you don't love anything more than God. Make sure that you keep things in the proper order. It's God here. You love God this much. But then it's like, well, what if it's like 59, or like 51-49? Or does it need to be like 90-10? Like how much do we need to love God more than we love this other thing? And all of this happens. But this was the juxtaposition. God in one hand and whatever else in the other. In high school, for me, this was one of two things: my girlfriend or baseball. Like that was the two things that I loved the most whenever I was in high school. And so I heard this teaching in our youth group, and it was really, really hard for me because I didn't know how to love God more. I was like, I'm trying. I'm not sure exactly how to do this. And so I was stuck. What do I do? It was sinful for me to love my girlfriend or baseball more than God, and he would be mad if I did. And not only that, God might ask me to sacrifice her. Like, what? Like, what does that mean? What does that look like? Does that mean that we would have to break up? Or is there something else going on here? I don't know. Like, how do I fix this problem? Or he might just take her from me as punishment because I loved her too much. This would wreck me, and it'd go round and round and round in the circle. How do I fix this before God gets mad at me and fixes the problem for me? Do you see my dilemma? Do you see the problem that creates? Like, I don't know how to love God more. I'm trying, but so you would go a little bit further. I would read my Bible to prove to God that I loved him so that he wouldn't end our relationship or cause me to break up with my girlfriend because I was too in love with her. Do you hear how convoluted that logic is? Like how backward all of that is? I would work harder at being a Christian to keep God off my case, specifically so that I could keep the things that I actually love the most. Like, it doesn't even work logically. But this is where, like, the knots I would tie myself into. How do I figure this out? So in that case, my love for God was driven so that I could keep the thing that was rivaling God in my heart. Like, it doesn't even make sense. It tied me up in knots. I felt so much guilt over it, so much fear and worry about what might happen to me or to, whenever I got to into high school and I was playing baseball, but I wasn't getting to play as much as I wanted. And I was like, well, this must be God like trying to take this love away from me a little bit. And, maybe this makes it where I don't love baseball as much because I'm not getting to play as much. So I'm mad at the coach. So maybe this is God kind of like punishing me for loving baseball too much. Like that's the stuff that would happen. I would play this game a lot with a whole lot of guilt in between. And so God is putting Abraham to the test. Who do you love more? So let's just follow that story under that pretense for a couple of minutes, all right? Just make it clear. Let's follow under that pretense, which I'm telling you is not where we're going to go. But let's just follow it for just a second. So Genesis 22, verse 3. So Abraham rose early in the morning, saddled his donkey, and took 2 of his young men with him and his son Isaac. And he cut the wood for the burnt offering and arose and went to the place of which God had told him. Well, I guess we're going to see what happens, but Abraham starts way better than he started the last time God came to him and said, I want you to do something crazy. He comes to him and he says, I want you to do this, and instead of laughing or instead of dismissing, instead of writing God off and saying that there's no way that's going to happen, this time Abraham says, well, let's get the horses ready. Like that's pretty much his response. Let's get the donkey ready and let's head out there. Last time he laughed. This time he simply sets out to obey. So good job, Abraham. You've started well. Applaud you for doing this well. He seems to have learned his lesson. Good for him. And so he loves God more than Isaac, and all is well. Bad for Isaac, but it's good for Abraham, right? Genesis 22, verse 4. On the 3rd day, Abraham lifted up his eyes, and he saw the place from afar. And then Abraham said to his young men, so his servants that are there with him, stay here with the donkey. I and the boy will go over there and worship and come again to you. And Abraham took the wood of the burnt offering and laid it on Isaac his son. And he took in his hand the fire and the knife. And so they went both of them together. And Isaac said to his father Abraham, my father. And he said, here I am, my son. He said, behold, the fire and the wood, but where is the lamb for the burnt offering? It's an awkward question. And Abraham said, God will provide for himself the lamb for a burnt offering, my son. And so they went both of them together. Okay, so Abraham is still steadily moving in the direction of offering this sacrifice. But there are a couple of indications that perhaps there is more going on in Abraham's mind than kind of meets the eye. Okay? Just a couple of hints that you miss them if you read by it in the narrative too fast. First, he says, hey guys, servants, hang on to this donkey. I'm going up with Isaac to worship, and we will be right back. Now, was that just like a slip of the tongue by Abraham? Or was there something else going on right there? Either he's lying because he knows he's going up there with Isaac and we aren't coming back, just he is coming back. So either he's lying or he knows something that we don't. It wasn't supposed to be we coming back, just Abraham. But he says we. So why is that? And then if you keep going, Isaac starts to get a sense that something is off. The whole setup is off. They're missing the most important part of the sacrifice, namely the sacrifice, to which his dad says, don't worry, God will provide it. Now, we don't know if Abraham was saying that because he believed a substitute would be provided, or if it's kind of almost ironic and he's just kind of playing coy with Isaac a little bit, like, hey, don't worry, God's going to provide. It's you, but God's going to provide. Like, we don't know, but what we do know is the narrator knows as he's telling this story. And so the narrator knows that Abraham will have a substitute that is going to show up. So this is where I started to question this whole narrative about whether this story is actually about Abraham proving his love to God. This isn't God saying, you love me, prove it. Kill the thing on earth that you love the most to prove that you actually love me. There's actually something else going on here. And we'll leave it at that, but we'll get to it here in just a second. But it's right there in that part, especially whenever Abraham says, we'll be back in a minute. That makes me realize, wait a minute, there's something else going on in Abraham's mind. There's something else he's thinking that puts a different slant on all of this. So let's move forward just a little bit more in the narrative here, in the sequence, and then we'll reassess. So Genesis 22, verse 8. Abraham said, God will provide for himself a lamb for a burnt offering, my son. And so they went, both of them together. And when they came to the place of which God had told Abraham, and built the altar there, and laid the wood in order, and bound Isaac his son, and laid him on the altar on top of the wood, then Abraham reached out his hand and took the knife to slaughter his son. Now this is like the most awkward of moments here. This is where it gets awkward for all the sons in the room here this morning. Like, what is going on here? Would my dad actually kill me for God? Like, is that how this is supposed to work? And the dads start thinking, well, could I kill my son? And if the answer is no, then it's like, oh man, well, God's not going to like me. And if the answer is yes, it's like, whoa, what kind of person am I? Like, you're trying to figure out, how does this work? I don't understand how we do all of this. And you realize why so many non-believers read this story and think, what kind of religion is this, and what kind of God is this? In order to understand this passage fully, we need a little bit of help. And the writer of Hebrews gives us the context that we need, that is the key to unlocking the rest of this passage. Now, we read about how the writer of Hebrews commended Abraham for his faith for becoming a sojourner, but it's not all that he says about Abraham. He says something else. So let's read Hebrews 11, 17, 18, and 19. So Hebrews 11, verse 17. By faith, Abraham, when he was tested, offered up Isaac, and he who had received the promises was in the act of offering up his only son, of whom it was said, through Isaac shall your offspring be named. He considered, and this is the key, he considered that God was able even to raise him from the dead, from which, figuratively speaking, he did receive him back. Now, with that context, let's reassess everything that's going on in this passage. Let's reassess everything that is happening here about Abraham's behavior and God's testing. This is not a test of love or a test of loyalty. It is not trying to figure out who sits atop our hearts and who we love the most. This is a story that is not a test about love, but is a story about trust and faith. Abraham's faith was at a point where God told him he would do something, and Abraham laughed because it was impossible. That was Abraham's response the first time that he heard God say, I'm going to do something crazy here. That's where Abraham's faith was at one point. Now God says to do something, and even without a follow-up question for clarification, Abraham has worked out the scenario in his mind according to what he knows to be true about the nature of God, and decided that he would kill him because God would raise him from the dead anyway. So in Abraham's mind, he was never going to be a moment without Isaac. He was always going to have Isaac. Even if he had to kill Isaac, God would raise him from the dead, and they'd be walking back with their servants back to the house. So when he said, we'll be back in just a minute, he meant it. Now, did he believe a substitute would show up? Maybe. But even if it didn't, he believed that God was powerful enough. If he can give me a son from a 90-year-old woman when I'm 100 years old, he can raise him from the dead too. That's where his faith had gotten to. So previously, God explicitly told him how he would remain faithful to his covenant, and Abraham laughed. Now God tells him to kill the apparent key to remaining faithful to that covenant, and Abraham's faith is so stout, so firm in who God is, that he believes God will do something even more impossible than a 90-year-old woman having a child. He'll raise him from the dead. God never tells Abraham that he would do this. Abraham reasons this out on his own, and this is how deep his faith has grown. To say there is nothing impossible with God. If God says to do it, I better obey because he's going to do it. There's a totally different idea of what is happening here. So when life stinks and you are enduring pain and grief and suffering, and someone tells you that you just need to have faith, remember that faith isn't in the act, like your faith is not in the idea that God will just work it all out and everything's going to be fine. Your faith is in the person and the character of God. This is where Abraham had put his faith. He had said, I don't know everything there is to know about this God, but what I know is he will be faithful. I know that much about his character, and I will trust in that. If he had learned one lesson, it was that God always will do what he promises, always. And so Abraham was fully banking on that. Friends, I want you to hear me this morning. God doesn't want you to love anyone or anything less. Loving someone is one of the most godly things you can do, and I'll show you that in Scripture here in just a minute. Loving someone is one of the most godly things you can do. God doesn't set the fruit of the Spirit. The first one, love, joy, peace, the first one is love. God doesn't set the first fruit of the Spirit against your worship of him. Do you understand what I'm saying here? He doesn't say, don't express this fruit of the Spirit too much because that wouldn't be worship. He calls you to express deeply that fruit, and that is how you worship him. Not do it less, do it more. I should not love my wife or my kids less because I love God. I should love them more because I love God. So be done with the guilt and the fear and that view of God. God wants to know if we'll love, God doesn't want to know if we'll love people less. He wants to know if we'll trust the people that we love the most with him and his character. Not love less, trust more. You see, this is what God was getting at with Abraham. Abraham loved Isaac, and there is no doubt. And he wasn't saying, you love Isaac too much, and I'm going to test you on that. Abraham loved Isaac, and God's command would have been startling, and it would have been difficult, and it would have been hard to process, but it isn't about whether we would give up those that we love the most. It's about whether we trust God with those that we love the most. This is less about sacrifice and more about trust. You see, if you view this story as about love and trying to like set those things against each other, your view of God will be completely skewed. You'll see God as this vindictive person that's out to get you, that's always kind of putting your love for people and for things on a scale. You'll see him as this kind of big scary ogre that you have to be afraid of, and functionally, he will be quite literally a killjoy. Every time you love something and you find joy in something, you'll have to live afraid that God will take those things from you. But he doesn't want to kill those things or to ask us to kill those things that bring us joy. He wants us to enjoy them within the context of his love and his provision. Abraham's faith was put to the test, and then he had to put it into action. He didn't say, God, I love you more than my son, so okay, I'll do it. So okay, I'll kill him. He said, I don't understand. I don't want to do this, but I'll trust that you've got a bigger plan that I don't see. I'll trust in that plan, and I'll do it because you've always been faithful, and you've always delivered on every promise that you've ever made. Even when I've been unfaithful and I've doubted you, God, you have never been unfaithful. You have always stayed true to your word. I've learned my lesson, and I will trust you. Even if I have to kill him, I'm convinced you'll bring him back to life. That's how much I trust you that you'll come through, because you have made this promise. And I just wonder how many of you need to hear that this morning. I know I need to hear that this morning. I need to hear that every single day. There's so much that I would love, that I like so many ways that I could apply this in my life. I'll tell you one way, just kind of like in a general sense. about a year and a half ago, Emily lost her job that she had completely out of the blue, was not expecting this at all, lost her job, a job that we had referred to as a lottery ticket and as a not because of like necessarily like salary and stuff, but because there were so many things that came with it that we had been lacking because of what we had been doing here in planting a church and being here. It had great benefits that were through the roof. We had not been able to save any money for retirement. There was a pension plan that came with that. And so it was like, oh man, look at this. God is doing this, and we never could have planned this. This has got to be from God's hand. And then out of nowhere, it was all gone. And we kind of felt like, what? You just took Isaac from us. Like, this was you delivering. Like, this wasn't even our plan. Like, we didn't even necessarily seek this all out. Like, this was your plan, and now you've taken that from us. And it's led to just a long time of confusion and frustration and like, what is going on here? This doesn't make any sense. God, if we were planning this out, this is not how we would have done that. To which all we've really heard in response to that is, well, you're not planning this out, I am. To which our response has had to be, well, okay, I mean, we're going to trust you, but can we get some glimpse of what's going on here? Like, that would be helpful. And it's kind of like, no, not really. Now, Emily's been very fortunate. She was able to get another job, but it's still like things are not quite the same. Like, things are a little bit different, and it's still left us where we're asking a ton of questions. And so Abraham's story pushed us then. It pushes us today. Trying to figure out, not what, but our view is not, what, we love this situation or this job or whatever so much that maybe we loved it more than God, and so God punished us for that. That's not what's going on here. It's simply a matter of we were in a place, and we're still sorting through some things where it's like, I don't understand what's happening here. Like, I just don't understand it. And so then we have a choice. Do we get mad? Do we get angry? Do we get frustrated? Sure, all of that is buried in there somewhere. But the ultimate question is, do we trust? When God says that I'll be with you even to the end of the age, that I will never leave you nor forsake you, do we trust that that is true? And I know every single one of you, because this is the way life works, every single one of you could tell one, if not 100 different stories just like that in your own life, where you've said, this makes no sense. Why would you do it this way, God? I thought this is what you had charted out for us. We thought we saw a clear path ahead. We thought we could see out into the distance and how you were working here. But it's not that way, and now it stinks. All of you could tell that story. And so Abraham's story is evergreen for us. Will we trust him with things that are out of our control that only he can do? Or will we try to make it happen ourselves and fix the problem ourselves? We all experience some version of this in the world. Sometimes that these are things that God has directly orchestrated himself. And he is putting our faith to the test just as he did Abraham's, to see if we trust him, to actively promote our faith. Sometimes these are things that are the result of sin, ours or someone else's. And we're trying to figure out how do we trust God amidst all of this brokenness and this pain. And sometimes, maybe most of the time, we don't really know why this happened. We don't really know what caused it. We don't really know who's to blame. We don't really know who's at fault. We don't really know if it's God putting us to the test, or if it's the result of sin, or if it's some deal that Satan has made, like with Job. Like we don't really know. All we know is that our response is to be the same, to trust in the person of God, his character and his kindness. And if we do this, it doesn't mean that we are naive and suckers for this religion. It means that we trust in a God who is bigger and more powerful than we ever could be. And we could end the story there. But Genesis doesn't end the story there. It keeps going. And this is where really the payoff is for us this morning. Genesis 22, verse 9. When they came to the place of which God had told him, Abraham built the altar there and laid the wood in order and bound his son Isaac and laid him on the altar on top of the wood. And then Abraham reached out his hand and took the knife to slaughter his son. But the angel of the Lord called to him from heaven and said, Abraham, Abraham. And he said, Here I am. And he said, Do not lay your hand on the boy or do anything to him, for now I know that you fear God, seeing you have not withheld your son, your only son, from me. Notice that. Now I know that you fear God. Not now I know that you love God. Not now I know that you love me the most. But now I know that you understand me. You fear me properly in the sense that you honor me. And Abraham lifted up his eyes and he looked, and behold, and behind him was a ram caught in a thicket by his horns. And Abraham went and took the ram and offered it up as a burnt offering instead of his son. And so Abraham called the name of that place, The Lord Will Provide. And he said to this day, On the mount of the Lord it shall be provided. So a sacrifice was provided, just as Abraham had said. A substitute in Isaac's place. This is one of the clearest pictures in the Old Testament of the gospel. Except God did sacrifice his son as a substitute in our place. You know what's interesting is Abraham was still learning the character of God. We, in some sense, we are as well. But we have at least all of this to know the character of God. We have at least all of this in front of us that Abraham did not. You and I know that we can trust God. We have not had God show up in our dreams. We have not had God pass by in front of us as a smoking pot or as a flame. We've not had God promise to make us a great nation and show us the stars in the sky. Like we don't have that experience. We haven't had our 90-year-old wife give birth to a miracle baby. But I mean maybe some of us will get there, but not yet. So we haven't had that, and so but we have something far greater that is tangible proof for us. You see, God was weaving this story together from the very beginning, and the story of Abraham and Isaac is a shadow of the story that was to come. Because much like this story, one day a son, an only son, would have wood strapped to his back and be sent up a hill. He would be sent up a hill to die as an atoning sacrifice. And this time, God would provide the lamb, but the lamb would be the son. And much as God knew that Abraham loved him and he knew Abraham's faith and trust was in him because he did not withhold his son, his only son, we know that God does love us because he did not withhold his son, his only son. Instead, Jesus died on the cross in our place, which is why we have passages like Romans 8:31 and 32. Listen to the logic of this passage. Romans 8:31. What then shall we say to these things? If God is for us, who can be against us? He who did not spare his own son, but gave him up for us all, how will he not also graciously give us all things? Do you hear the logic of what Paul is saying there? He is saying, do you want to know how you can trust the character of God? Do you want to know how you can lean on him? How you can trust that he is there and he will always be with you? Do you want to know how you can trust that? Abraham would have answered that. He would have said, well, because God did an impossible thing before, Isaac was born, so that's how I can trust him. He was good to his promise. We can say, because he gave up his son. He did not spare his son, but gave his son up on our behalf. If God will do that, how much more will he do for us? That's the logic. And then listen to the way that John writes this. 1 John 4, verse 10. And this is love, not that we have loved God, but that he loved us and sent his son to be a propitiation for our sin, to be a payment for our sin, to pay the price for our sin, to remove that sin from us. And he says, beloved, if God so loved us, So this is the response to the fact that God loved us. You might think, based off of the teaching that I had heard my whole life about Abraham, is if God loved us this much, why wouldn't you love God the most of anything else in your life? That's a reasonable application, right? I've heard that exact application, in fact. But that's not what John says. John says, beloved, if God so loved us, we also ought to love one another. No one has ever seen God. If we love one another, God abides in us, and his love is perfected in us. If God loves us, we should love one another. It doesn't say we should love one another, but not too much, lest God get mad. It says we should love one another with all we are. And that as we love one another, we show people who God is. Do you see that? No one has ever seen God, but the implication of the rest of that verse is that when we love one another, we give people a glimpse of who God is. So God is not saying, don't love people too much. He's saying, love them with all that you are, and in doing so, you can show them just a little bit of who I am. Love people. His love is perfected in us because we love people. God doesn't set our love for our children and our family and for one another and even for good things in our life that we love. Like he doesn't set those things against his love for us or our love for him. Like he doesn't say, let's weigh out the scales and see who wins. He says, love me, love others. And he lifts all of it and he says, now go do that. Just trust me with those things that you love. Don't worship the things that you love. Worship me. And in so doing, you will know who God is, and that will be perfected in you. So then our aim is love. Our duty is trust. And our aim is love. Or our duty, in another word, is faith. So when someone says you just have to have faith, think of Abraham. Say, you're right, I do just have to have faith. But it's not faith that all's going to work out, all's going to be well. It's faith that God loved me in such a way that shows and demonstrated his love for us, and that while we were yet sinners, Christ died for us. That's what faith looks like. Let's pray together. Father, I thank you for the example of Abraham. I thank you for this story that's so hard for our ears to even hear, so hard for us to read and fully understand. I thank you for this story that it teaches us about what an act of faith looks like. And that an act of faith doesn't look like this kind of like tug of war over who wins the battle of our hearts. Instead, the way an act of faith looks is that we march forward in complete trust that you are in control, you are sovereign, and you will bring to pass the things that are best for us. And we know that this is true. We know that we can count on you for this because you did not withhold your son, your only son. May we cling to that promise and cling to that empty tomb. It's in Christ's name we pray. Amen.